Sophie stood at the center of the grand ballroom, her emerald green dress shimmering under the golden chandelier. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a testament to her hard work and dedication. She had poured her heart and soul into building her company, and now it stood as a $65 million empire. As she looked around the room, she felt a flicker of pride seeing familiar faces. Employees, partners, friends, all gathered to celebrate her 36th birthday. Her husband Daniel raised his glass, signaling for attention. "A toast," he began, his deep voice commanding the room. Sophie smiled warmly, expecting a heartfelt tribute to their shared journey. After all, they had started with nothing but a dream. "Tonight, I want to announce something special," Daniel continued, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Sophie. "Moving forward, Sophie will be stepping down from her management role in the company." The words struck her like a thunderclap. The room fell silent, save for the faint clinking of glasses as guests exchanged confused glances. Sophie's smile froze, disbelief flashing across her face. Daniel wasn't finished. While her contributions were important in the early stages, the company needs fresh leadership to take it to the next level. "I'm confident we're making the right decision for the future." Sophie's heart pounded as his words cut deeper than any blade. This wasn't a discussion they had. This wasn't a mutual decision. He had planned this without her knowledge. As polite applause trickled through the room, Sophie felt her world crumble. She had sacrificed everything for this company, her time, her health, even the chance to start a family. And now, Daniel, the man she thought was her partner, had humiliated her in front of everyone. When the toasts ended, Sophie slipped away, her vision blurred by unshed tears. In a secluded corner of the venue, she tried to steady her breathing, but the betrayal was too overwhelming. Tonight, the man she trusted most had publicly dismissed her as if her efforts were insignificant. The celebration continued without her, but Sophie knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. Sophie sat on the balcony of their penthouse that night, the cool breeze brushing against her tear-streaked face. The city lights below sparkled like 1,000 diamonds, but their brilliance only deepened the ache in her chest. Her mind replayed the events of the evening, each word of Daniel's speech like a slap. How could he do this to her? She had stood by him through thick and thin, giving up her promising career to focus entirely on their shared dream. While he was busy networking and making bold decisions, she had been the one to lay the foundation, working late nights and missing holidays to ensure the company thrived. Sophie's thoughts drifted to the sacrifices she had made, sacrifices Daniel had never fully acknowledged. Her family had warned her, especially her sister, who often said, "Don't lose yourself in his shadow, Sophie." But she had ignored them, believing Daniel's promises of equality and partnership. Tears fell freely as the pain consumed her, but beneath the sorrow, a new emotion began to stir. It was subtle at first, like a flickering flame in a storm, but it grew stronger with each passing moment. Anger. How dare he belittle her contributions? How dare he strip her of her dignity in front of everyone they knew? Sophie clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had spent years building the company, and she wasn't going to let Daniel erase her so easily. Taking a deep breath, Sophie wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. She wasn't sure what she would do yet, but she knew one thing: this wasn't the end of her story. If Daniel thought he could push her aside without consequences, he had severely underestimated her. As the first rays of dawn broke over the city, Sophie rose from the balcony chair. Her heart still ached, but her resolve had hardened. She would find a way to reclaim her place, not just in the company, but in her own life. The early morning light filtered through the heavy curtains as Sophie walked into the spacious living room of their penthouse. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Daniel's betrayal had festered in her thoughts all night, and she wasn't going to let him sweep it under the rug. She found him seated in his home office, the large mahogany desk cluttered with documents and his laptop glowing faintly. Daniel looked up when she entered, his expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Sophie, it's early. Can we talk later? I have a meeting to prepare for." "No," Sophie said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We're talking now." Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Fine. What's this about?" Sophie stepped closer, her gaze piercing. You blindsided me last night, Daniel. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. What were you thinking, making that announcement without even discussing it with me first? Daniel sighed, his tone patronizing. Sophie, it wasn't personal. It's just business. The company has grown, and it's time for a leadership shift. You've done your part, but now it's time for professionals to take over. Her hands trembled, but she refused to back down. Professionals? I built that company with you. I've worked harder than anyone, sacrificed more than anyone, and now you're telling me I'm irrelevant? You're overreacting, Daniel said dismissively, waving a hand as if brushing off her concerns. You've always been emotional about these things. This is the best decision for the company's future. Sophie's jaw tightened. This isn't about the company. This is about control, isn't it? You want to push me out so you can take full credit for everything I've done. Daniel smirked, the coldness in his eyes sending a chill down her spine. If that's how you want to see it, fine. But the decision has been made, Sophie. You need to accept it and move on. The words hit her like a slap, but they also solidified her resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, deliberate, and unforgivable. I won't accept it, she said, her voice low but steady, and I won't let you erase everything I've worked for. Daniel chuckled, the sound devoid of any warmth. Good luck with that. Sophie turned and walked out of the office, her head held high. She didn't have a plan yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Daniel had underestimated her, and he was going to regret it. That evening, Sophie found herself pacing the penthouse, her mind racing. Daniel's arrogance and dismissive attitude only fueled her determination to uncover the full extent of his betrayal. She needed to know how deep this went and how long he had been planning to push her out. As she wandered past Daniel's office, a thought struck her. What if the answers she needed were in there? For a moment, she hesitated. Daniel's office had always been his private domain, and she had respected that. But after what he had done, respect felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Pushing open the door, Sophie stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar, the walls lined with shelves of books and framed certificates. On the desk, Daniel's laptop sat closed, but a stack of folders caught her attention. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the papers. At first, they seemed like routine business documents, performance reports, financial projections. But then she saw it, a detailed plan titled Leadership Transition Strategy. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the contents. The document outlined a timeline for her removal, complete with steps to undermine her authority and diminish her contributions to the company. It even included manipulated performance reviews to paint her as ineffective. Sophie's hands shook as she dug deeper, uncovering emails between Daniel and other executives. They discussed ways to justify her exit and offered her a severance package that was insultingly low given her role in the company's success. A wave of nausea washed over her as the full extent of Daniel's betrayal came into focus. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a meticulously planned operation designed to cut her out entirely. For a moment, Sophie felt paralyzed by the weight of it all. How could the man she had loved and trusted be capable of such cruelty? But as the shock wore off, a new emotion took its place: rage. She gathered the documents and closed the folder, her resolve hardening with every passing second. If Daniel thought she would go quietly, he was wrong. She wasn't just fighting for her position in the company. She was fighting for her dignity, her self-worth, and everything she had worked for. Clutching the evidence to her chest, Sophie made her way to the balcony. The city lights stretched out before her, a reminder of the world she had helped build. With a deep breath, she whispered to herself, "You started this fight, Daniel. Now, let's see if you can finish it." The next morning, Sophie sat at her dining table. The documents she had taken from Daniel's office spread out before her. Her coffee sat untouched as she sifted through the evidence again, her mind racing with questions. Who could she trust? Who could help her fight this battle against a man she once thought was her partner in every sense? The answer came to her quickly. Rachel. Rachel Carter was more than a longtime friend. She was one of the sharpest attorneys Sophie had ever met. They had been college roommates, bonding over late-night study sessions and their shared determination to carve out successful careers. Over the years, Rachel had built a reputation as a fierce advocate for her clients, particularly in cases involving corporate injustice. Sophie picked up her phone and dialed Rachel's number, her heart pounding as she waited for her friend to answer. "Sophie, it's been ages." Rachel's voice was warm and familiar, immediately easing some of the tension in Sophie's chest. "Rachel, I need your help," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. It's about Daniel and the company. He's trying to push me out." There was a brief pause before Rachel replied, her tone turning serious. "Tell me everything." Sophie spent the next hour recounting the events of the past few days, from Daniel's humiliating announcement at her birthday party to the discovery of the damning documents. Rachel listened intently, asking questions to clarify details. When Sophie finished, Rachel exhaled sharply. "Sophie, this isn't just a betrayal. It's a violation of your rights. If what you've told me is accurate, you have a strong case against him. But we'll need to move quickly." "Do you really think I can fight this?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's tone softened, but her words were firm. "Of course you can. Sophie, you built that company. You have the evidence to prove your contributions, and more importantly, you have me. We'll make sure Daniel doesn't get away with this." Relief washed over Sophie, but it was quickly replaced by determination. "What do we do first?" "I'll need to see the documents you found," Rachel said. "Bring everything to my office this afternoon. We'll review it together and start building a strategy." Sophie agreed and ended the call, feeling a renewed sense of hope. For the first time in days, she felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. Later that day, Sophie sat across from Rachel in her sleek downtown office. The room was filled with natural light, and the walls were adorned with framed degrees and awards, testaments to Rachel's impressive career. Rachel leaned forward, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she examined the documents Sophie had brought. With every page she turned, her expression grew darker. "This is worse than I thought," Rachel said finally, setting the papers down. "Not only did Daniel plan to push you out, but he also went to great lengths to discredit you. These fabricated performance reports are blatant lies." Sophie swallowed hard, the sting of betrayal fresh all over again. "What can we do about it?" Rachel tapped her pen against her notepad, deep in thought. "First, we'll need to gather more evidence. These documents are a strong start, but we need to paint a complete picture of your contributions to the company and Daniel's attempts to undermine you. Emails, contracts, financial records, anything that shows your role in the company's success." Sophie nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Sophie and Rachel worked tirelessly. Sophie combed through her personal files, pulling out old contracts, strategic plans, and meeting notes. She reached out to trusted colleagues, discreetly asking for copies of emails and reports that could support her case. Rachel, meanwhile, dug into the company's public records and Daniel's financial dealings, uncovering discrepancies that hinted at his unethical behavior. She also began drafting a legal argument that highlighted the breach of their marital and professional agreements. The work was exhausting, but it gave Sophie a sense of purpose. With every piece of evidence they uncovered, her confidence grew. She began to remember the woman she used to be, the determined, ambitious leader who had built a multi-million-dollar company from the ground up. One evening, as Sophie sat in Rachel's office reviewing their findings, Rachel looked up from her laptop with a satisfied smile. "We have enough to move forward," she said. "This is no longer just about reclaiming your position in the company. It's about exposing Daniel for who he really is." Sophie took a deep breath, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on her. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever it takes, I'm ready to fight." Rachel nodded, her expression filled with determination. "Good, because this is only the beginning." As the evidence piled up, Sophie's next move became clear. It was time to put Daniel on notice. Under Rachel's guidance, they drafted a letter that would serve as both a warning shot and a declaration of war. The letter was concise yet powerful, outlining the clear breaches of both professional and marital agreements. It demanded not only Sophie's reinstatement in the company, but also fair compensation for her years of dedication and contributions. Rachel included a deadline for Daniel's response, making it clear that failure to comply would result in a legal battle he wouldn't soon forget. Late one evening, Sophie sat in Rachel's office as they finalized the letter. The room was quiet, except for the tapping of Rachel's keyboard. The words on the screen felt like a lifeline, a tangible representation of Sophie's determination to fight back. "Once we send this, there's no turning back," Rachel said, glancing at Sophie over her glasses. "Are you ready for that?" Sophie met her friend's gaze, her voice steady. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." With a nod, Rachel pressed send, and the letter was on its way to Daniel's legal team. The next step was rallying support from within the company. Sophie knew that many of her colleagues respected her and valued her leadership, but she also understood the risk of reaching out. If word got back to Daniel too soon, it could jeopardize everything. One by one, Sophie contacted a handful of trusted employees, people she had mentored, worked alongside, and shared her vision with over the years. She met with them discreetly, explaining her side of the story and presenting the evidence she had gathered. To her relief, the response was overwhelmingly positive. "We've always known you were the real driving force behind this company," one senior manager told her. "If you need us to testify or provide more information, we're with you." As Sophie walked away from each meeting, she felt a growing sense of empowerment. For too long, she had let Daniel's betrayal make her feel small and insignificant. But now, surrounded by allies and armed with evidence, she began to reclaim her sense of self-worth. The fallout from the letter was swift. Just 2 days after it was sent, Sophie received an angry call from Daniel. She was in her apartment, sorting through old documents, when her phone buzzed with his name on the screen. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Hello?" "What the hell are you doing, Sophie?" Daniel's voice was sharp and cold, his anger barely restrained. "This letter. You've lost your mind. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're stirring up?" Sophie gripped the phone tightly, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm standing up for myself, Daniel. Something you never thought I'd do." "Standing up for yourself?" he scoffed. "You're making a fool of yourself. No court is going to take your side, and you'll ruin whatever reputation you have left in the process." "I think you're underestimating me, just like you've always done," Sophie said, her voice steady. "And if you think I'll back down because of your threats, you don't know me at all." Daniel's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Finally, he muttered, "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting you," Sophie shot back. "But don't worry, I'm done making that mistake." She hung up before he could respond, her hands trembling. It took her a moment to steady her breathing, but when she did, she felt a flicker of pride. For the first time in years, she had stood up to Daniel, and it felt liberating. The tension within the company grew in the days that followed. Word of Sophie's fight began to spread, and employees started to question Daniel's motives. Some whispered about the sudden change in leadership, while others openly voiced their support for Sophie. Daniel, meanwhile, doubled down on his arrogance. He held meetings with his legal team, issued statements downplaying Sophie's role in the company, and even tried to intimidate employees who had shown loyalty to her. But his efforts only made him look desperate. As Sophie watched the tide begin to turn in her favor, she realized that the battle was far from over. But for the first time since the betrayal, she felt like she had the upper hand. With Rachel by her side and an ever-growing network of supporters, Sophie prepared herself for the next phase of the fight. Whatever Daniel threw at her next, she was ready to face it head-on. The day of the first legal meeting arrived, bringing with it a whirlwind of emotions for Sophie. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that exuded confidence, she entered the conference room with Rachel by her side. Her heart pounded, but she kept her head high, refusing to let nerves take over. The room was sleek and professional, with a long mahogany table at its center. At one end sat Daniel, flanked by his high-powered legal team. His smug expression was a sharp reminder of the man who had betrayed her so deeply. Across from him, Sophie and Rachel took their seats, armed with evidence and an unwavering resolve. The meeting began with formal introductions, but the tension in the room was palpable. Daniel's lead attorney, a sharp-tongued man named Gregory Lane, wasted no time attempting to undermine Sophie's case. "Let's be honest," Gregory began, his tone dripping with condescension. Mrs. Carter's role in the company was more supportive than strategic. While we respect her contributions, the growth and success of Carter Enterprises were driven primarily by Mr. Carter's leadership. Sophie clenched her fists under the table, but Rachel was unfazed. With all due respect, Rachel countered, her voice calm but firm, the evidence we've provided paints a very different picture. Mrs. Carter was not only a co-founder, but the architect behind many of the company's key strategies, including the expansion into international markets and the development of its most profitable products. She slid a thick folder across the table, containing meticulously compiled documents, emails, contracts, meeting notes, and financial reports. Gregory opened it, his confident demeanor faltering slightly as he flipped through the pages. But Daniel wasn't ready to back down. "Sophie," he said, leaning forward, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "This isn't personal. I know you feel slighted, but the decisions I've made are in the best interest of the company. You need to trust that." Sophie met his gaze, her voice steady. "Trust? You destroyed that the moment you humiliated me in front of everyone and tried to erase everything I've built. This isn't about feelings, Daniel. It's about justice." As the meeting continued, Rachel systematically dismantled Daniel's claims. She presented evidence of Sophie's direct involvement in major deals, highlighted glowing testimonials from former colleagues, and even produced internal emails where Daniel had praised Sophie's leadership. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the foundation of Daniel's case was shaky at best. His legal team, once smug and dismissive, now seemed uneasy. As Sophie and Rachel left the conference room, Sophie allowed herself a small smile. For the first time, she felt the scales tipping in her favor. The second legal meeting took place 2 weeks later, but this time, it wasn't just lawyers and company executives in the room. Rachel had successfully petitioned for employee testimonials to be included as evidence, and several of Sophie's former colleagues had agreed to testify. One by one, employees took the stand to share their stories. "Sophie Carter was the heart of this company," said Elena, a senior manager who had worked closely with Sophie for years. "She was the one who stayed late to solve problems, who mentored young employees, and who had the vision to take our products global. Without her, we wouldn't be where we are today." Another employee, a marketing director named James, recounted how Sophie had single-handedly turned a failing campaign into a multi-million-dollar success. "She saw potential where no one else did," he said. "She made us believe in the impossible." As the testimonies piled up, Daniel's facade began to crack. His attempts to discredit Sophie were met with irrefutable evidence of her achievements, and his dismissive attitude only made him look worse in the eyes of the court. The most damning moment came when Rachel presented a series of internal memos that revealed Daniel's true intentions. One email in particular stood out. "Once Sophie is out, we can restructure the company to reflect the leadership we need. Her role was never essential. This transition will only strengthen our position." The room fell silent as the email was read aloud. Sophie felt a surge of vindication as she saw the shock and disgust on the faces of the employees present. Rachel seized the moment. "This email proves what we've known all along. Daniel Carter's actions were not about what was best for the company. They were about consolidating power and erasing the contributions of the woman who built this empire with him." Daniel's lawyer tried to regain control, but the damage was done. The tide had turned definitively in Sophie's favor. As the meeting concluded, Sophie felt a wave of emotions: relief, pride, and an unshakable determination to see this through to the end. She had come too far to back down now. Walking out of the building, Rachel turned to her with a confident smile. "We've got him," she said. Sophie nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude and resolve. "Let's finish this." The court proceedings were nearing their conclusion, and the weight of the evidence against Daniel was impossible to ignore. Every piece of Sophie's story had been meticulously laid out, and with each day, her case grew stronger. Meanwhile, Daniel's confidence began to erode as the truth unraveled before the court and the public eye. The final blow came when the court permitted a deep dive into Carter Enterprises' financial and operational records. Rachel's legal team uncovered discrepancies that painted a troubling picture. Funds had been misallocated under Daniel's direction, and resources meant for company growth had instead been funneled into personal ventures, luxury properties, extravagant trips, and secretive investments. In a final bid to save face, Daniel attempted to pin the blame on Sophie, claiming her leadership had left the company vulnerable. However, Rachel was prepared for this tactic. She presented a detailed timeline showing how Sophie's strategies had increased profits year after year, highlighting that the financial irregularities had only started after Daniel began consolidating power. The court hearings were publicized, and the media caught wind of the drama. Headlines screamed of Daniel's betrayal and the courageous fight Sophie had waged to reclaim her legacy. Employees who had once stayed silent began to come forward, sharing their experiences under Daniel's leadership. The narrative shifted entirely. Sophie was no longer just a woman fighting for her rights. She became a symbol of resilience and justice. By the time the court reached its decision, Daniel's reputation was in tatters. The judge ruled in Sophie's favor, granting her a significant settlement and reinstating her rightful position within the company. Daniel was ordered to step down from his role, his credibility irreparably damaged. As Sophie left the courthouse, flanked by Rachel and her supporters, a crowd of reporters clamored for her attention. She paused, taking a deep breath before speaking. "This victory isn't just for me," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "It's for anyone who's ever been overlooked, undervalued, or pushed aside. This is proof that standing up for yourself, no matter how impossible it may seem, can change everything." The crowd erupted into applause, but Sophie knew the journey wasn't over. While the legal battle was won, the work of rebuilding her life was just beginning. The weeks following the verdict were a whirlwind of emotions. Sophie had won back her stake in Carter Enterprises, but she realized that her heart no longer belonged there. The company was a reflection of her past, a place filled with memories of hard work, triumph, and betrayal. It was time to move forward. She called a meeting with the board of directors, announcing her decision to sell her shares and step away from the company. There was an audible gasp in the room, but Sophie's calm expression left no room for argument. "I built this company from the ground up," she said. "But it's time for me to build something new, something that aligns with the person I've become." With the proceeds from the sale, Sophie launched a foundation aimed at empowering women in business. Her vision was clear: to provide mentorship, resources, and funding to women who faced the same challenges she had. She named the foundation Phoenix Rising, symbolizing her journey of rising from the ashes of betrayal to rebuild her life on her own terms. Her first project was a workshop series for women entrepreneurs, offering practical advice on leadership, strategy, and resilience. Sophie poured her heart into the work, finding joy and purpose in helping others succeed. As her foundation grew, so did Sophie's influence. Invitations to speak at conferences and events poured in, and she became a sought-after advocate for gender equality in business. Each time she stood on a stage, she shared her story, not to dwell on the pain, but to inspire others to persevere. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Sophie found herself sitting on her balcony, much like she had the night of her betrayal. But this time, the tears in her eyes were not from sadness. They were from gratitude. She had lost so much, but she had gained something far greater: a sense of freedom and purpose. Rachel joined her, holding 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Sophie smiled, clinking her glass against Rachel's. "To resilience," she replied. As the city lights twinkled below, Sophie felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced betrayal, fought against the odds, and emerged stronger than ever. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms. Sophie's journey was more than a fight for justice. It was a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and self-belief. She had faced betrayal from the person she trusted most, but rather than letting it break her, she used it as fuel to rebuild her life. Her foundation, Phoenix Rising, became a beacon of hope for countless women striving to make their mark in the world. Through mentorship programs, business grants, and powerful advocacy, Sophie helped others overcome the very challenges she had once faced. Years later, as she stood on the stage at a global conference, looking out at an audience filled with women whose lives she had touched, Sophie felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. She had turned her pain into purpose, her losses into lessons, and her setbacks into a story of triumph. Strength isn't about never falling, she told the crowd. It's about rising every time you do. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it from you. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this. You are capable of more than you could ever imagine. Don't let anyone dim your light. The applause thundered through the room, a resounding echo of her journey. Sophie Carter had found her voice, her purpose, and her power, and she had left an indelible mark on the world. Her legacy was not just one of success, but of inspiring others to rise, no matter how far they had fallen. And so, as the lights dimmed and Sophie stepped off the stage, she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a life rebuilt from the ashes, stronger and brighter than ever before. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Sophie's incredible journey. We hope her story of resilience, courage, and triumph has inspired you as much as it inspired us to share it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment below to share your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all our latest content. And remember to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story that might just brighten your day or give you the motivation you need. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue creating meaningful content for amazing viewers like you. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.